Has there ever been so much groaning in the lead into a report before?
I'm actually really glad we haven't voiced much of this out loud to each other yet, so this ought to be fun.
Strap in, team. This is Let Me Sum Up, your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording on Wurundjeri land, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. Global Vice President for propagating the Patreon at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
I'm so relieved you introduced me in that way, because if you had introduced me as Global VP of Marketing and Extortion, I feel like I don't want to associate myself with the term marketing today based on what we're going to be talking about. So thank you, Luke. Very happy to focus my efforts on promotion of the Patreon and not misguided efforts of others to sell different ideas.
With great power comes great responsibility, Frankie. Own your marketing secret master abilities.
I will. I'm wielding my Jedi mind tricks on all of you to subscribe to our Patreon, but nothing more, nothing less today.
Some foreshadowing there, well done. And those dulcet tones emanated from a man who has been surprised to discover a camp in the climate debate that he disagrees with more than the purveyors of integrated assessment models. Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
G'day. And I am sure that Bill Nordhaus is sleeping easier tonight, knowing that he is no longer my public enemy number one.
Okay, well, speaking of this, on this week's show, we look at a report that reckons the environmental challenges facing humanity are best addressed through a radical global marketing campaign to reshape human behaviour. But first, this year will be a consequential one for global climate policy, with nations around the world turning their attention to the next round of nationally determined contributions. These are the emissions reduction targets that parties to the Paris Agreement are required to submit every 5 years. And with 2 Australian states having legislated 2035 targets and one about to, all eyes are now turning to the Albanese government and what they are going to say about Australia's ambition for emissions reduction by 2035. Tennant, what are you watching out for as we work towards a firm 2035 target for Australia?
So I think that this is going to be one of the biggest things to be decided, or largely decided, in the course of this year, because that emissions target, emissions targets are not the only thing that matters. Policies matter, delivery matters, deliverability of targets matters. But there's no doubt that the target has a huge influence on the discourse, on government's policy development, on what industry and communities expect to happen, and the planning and investment and actions they do themselves. So it's a big deal domestically, and also every country's got a part in the collective confidence building process that is the Paris Agreement, whose idea is everyone's going to say what the most they think they can do is, and then they're going to keep coming back and re-upping those pledges based on their growing, we hope, confidence in themselves and in others. So, yeah, targets, not the be-all and end-all, but a big deal. And what I'll be watching for is what are the kinds of logic that people rely on, government is influenced by, but also that the rest of us refer to and imbibe in thinking about that target. Because there's a number of different ways of coming at this. You could look at what, to coin a phrase, what does the science say? And the science says the world needs to cut emissions a hell of a lot faster than it has been. Who needs to do how much is not really a science question unless we wish to dignify economics and ethics and politics as sciences. And I did a political science major, and I would not call that science in the least, as valuable a field of study as it is. These are things that people argue about. What are other countries doing? How much should that influence us? What did we commit to in the international sphere already? And we saw a bit of ideas from the Australian government and the umbrella group that Australia chairs about what needs to happen in NDCs. We could look at the states and tie a ribbon around what they're doing. We could, God help us all, do some economic modelling and try and turn dodgy model results into, oh, this is the one true answer. There's probably some other ideas too. But whichever way you look at it, I think the result is going to be a big number. That's a very scientific term.
Well, can I add two more relevant pathways, which I think will be material to this? Like, I think significantly you've got this process of sectoral decarbonisation plans that are being developed, and importantly developed right across the government. So the relevant portfolio ministers for, areas like industry and the built environment and transport and agriculture have been charged with developing their sectoral decarbonisation plans for their bit of the economy. And this is really significant both in terms of the kind of information that we use to ladder up to a 2035 target, but also just activating departments that have not necessarily had a lot of carriage of the climate policies that apply to their particular sectors. There are opportunities around that in terms of activating public servants and building that internal capacity and capability within the departments that have the deepest relationships with those sectors. But for some of them, they don't necessarily have a lot of internal capability historically, so they're building up those teams. And so, there's swings and roundabouts with that. The other one, of course, is through an electoral lens, right? And so within a year or so, we're going to be sort of facing down the barrel of a federal election. If we run to a full term, it could be sooner than that. But the government's saying it's going to run the full 3 years, and inevitably, this is going to be seen through the lens of what the Albanese government wishes to take to the election in terms of a narrative. And so, it's going to be fascinating, I reckon. What do you think, Frankie?
Well, I wanted to pick up on a couple of the things you said there. From that electoral perspective, I think one of the most interesting signs, I guess, on the way through will be what might happen in Queensland, because their state election is going to happen before the end of the year. I think it's in October or thereabouts. And, and the government there is looking at legislating their own 75% target. So I think it's going to be very significant to look at how that goes, what the LNP, the opposition in Queensland, does in response to that, because Queensland has been an important state federally in the last couple of elections. And so, if that state target sails through with support or no objection from the opposition in Queensland, you'd have to think that would only embolden the Albanese government to be targeting at least that level of ambition, potentially higher, especially reflecting on the recent experience of Victoria, which different, obviously different set of perhaps appetite from the electorate around that potentially, but there wasn't any objection from the opposition in Victoria to the 75 to 80% 2035 target down there, which is, I think Tennant qualifies as a big number.
I do.
If we can be so bold. So I feel like those states, including New South Wales, which is targeting similar level of ambition, are sort of setting the benchmark to be looking at. And I think the only other reflection I'd have on the sectoral pathways in terms of how that's sliced and diced was maybe just a reflection on how we saw that work in say Germany when we were over there. I think there's sort of various rationale you could take to suggest that certain parts of the sector should do more earlier. But the way I think we saw things really working in Germany was that they were pretty much cutting that pie up equally and like sort of not suggesting wildly different trajectories for different sectors, although that was being adjusted kind of on the way through, but we weren't seeing sort of wildly different ambitions across sectors. So like you'd assume perhaps the Australian government might take a similar approach there.
I think we should just take one more moment to go Queensland committing to a 75% target. Holy mogoly.
Yeah.
That's going to be a challenging number to deliver.
Especially since, isn't their 2030 target only 30%?
Yes. And their emissions have followed a different trajectory since 2005 to New South Wales or Victoria's. WA is the great unknown here. They have no statewide emissions targets at all. They do have a government emissions reduction target of 80% down, which is not meaningless because they are the electricity sector, but is not an economy-wide thingamabob. So, yeah, if you sort of squint at all the state things and you make a guesstimate of WA or an allowance for it, it probably takes you to a 70 to 75% national number as like something to tie a ribbon around and then sweat heavily while wondering how you're going to deliver it.
Yep.
So I have a final question, which is around timing for when we are expecting all to be revealed, because there's obviously, there's commitment to get something out there ahead of the election. But we also have between now and a likely election, COP29 in Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
And that could be a important marquee moment for some sort of intervention in this space. Where are you two placing your bets?
I think we're going to get the decision and the announcement in the first quarter of 2025. I think very few countries will have their NDCs out by Baku. Maybe the EU, who's just started. Hold on to your hats if you thought the 75% Queensland thing was big. The EU has just started consulting on a 90% off 1990 2035 target. Maybe they'll be in a position to try and lead by Baku. But, yeah, I think maybe we will, but there's a bit of process to go through first.
I think with the inside of, and it's pretty limited into how that work's going, like there's still a ways to go on things like sectoral pathways. Like the question I had, and I was trying to remember this out of last year's COP, the US and China said that off the back of the Sunnylands agreement, they would be both coming out with updated NDCs. And I couldn't remember off the top of my head if that was by this coming COP in Baku. It wasn't, was it?
No. China said that they would update both their existing 2030 number or set of numbers, commitments, and advance a new one in, I think, first half, maybe first quarter of 2025.
Yeah.
And they're going to keep us in suspense until then.
Yeah. So I thought the timelines for those two countries would also be influential for us as well if we were wanting to be, if we were wanting to be ambitious and seeing to be running with the pack and, and with two quite different countries and circumstances, then yeah, I think then it probably makes sense we're looking at 2025.
Which, of course, brings in the other big hinge factor in climate politics in 2024, which is the US election.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Which is all looking, fine.
Hunky-dory tennis.
Feeling very calm, and I think everybody else is too.
Nothing to see here.
Have we got an emboldened Biden administration or a lame duck Biden administration in Baku? Could be material as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, shall we chat about a report?
Oh.
It's a doozy.
That's putting it mildly.
Okay. Concern over whether humanity is living within the ecological boundaries imposed by our planet go back over 5 decades, and for many years was regarded as a more pressing concern than climate change. Ecological overshoot is said to occur when the world in aggregate consumes more resources than it can replenish in a given year, and an addiction to economic growth is often pointed to as the culprit. What to do about this is a point of significant contention. Some argue it is possible to continue to grow the economy, but to do so in an ecologically sustainable way. Others believe green growth is a fantasy, and we actually need to find ways of shrinking the economy over time to ensure we are living within the planet's ecological limits. These days, debates around climate change and limits to growth are very much intertwined, and a recent report wades into the fray with a new angle. The authors of the report, titled World Scientists Warning, the Behavioural Crisis Driving Ecological Overshoot, are firmly in the degrowth camp. However, their particular take is that maladaptive human behaviour is at the heart of the issue, and they say the solution is to harness the power of marketing, media and the entertainment industry to shift the culturally determined values and behaviour that are driving excessive consumption and population growth. Frankie, I found reading this report a pretty wild ride. What did you make of it?
Well,
Take that.
where does one start with this particular doozy of a paper? Mertz et al. I think I understand where some of this is coming from. The central premise being growth bad. We need to rapidly change our consumption patterns. But I found a lot of the concepts that they are talking about that are contributing to this behavioural crisis. They summarise it in, 3 big contributors: economic growth, marketing, and pronatalism, which I'm sure we'll talk about. They're just very confused arguments, and I think the kind assessment is that a lot of I think some of the data and the reference points they offer up here, I think are not broadly supported as either particularly good studies or that relate to the point that they're trying to make very clearly in this paper. And after we get through that sort of series of confusing and at times maddening arguments, and I'm sure we'll get into a couple of those, the clarion call to action at the end of it is that we, the royal we, need to collectively change behaviours, and we're to do this by empowering the marketing industry to put a whole bunch of campaigns in place to radically shift social norms overnight such that we don't particularly want to see growth. We don't want any more babies, and we want to fly less, eat less, weight less, generally have less fun being alive. And that I think in order to do that, we need to bridge a divide between the scientists in the know and the marketing and PR people who need to act and influence us all to do better. So,
because, Frankie, the fundamental breakdown in decision-making that has stymied climate action over the last 7 or 8 decades has been between climate scientists and the marketing profession.
Yes, that's definitely the most critical breakdown that we could possibly spend our time talking about.
Don Draper, where were you in the 60s?
Yes. Well, clearly he was coining, amazing ads for Coke, the drink. So, but could be forgiven for kind of thinking other things after reading this paper. My goodness.
Either way,
I think there are a couple of very deeply flawed ideas in this paper that I want to call out for us particularly to talk about. They sort of start the premise of the paper by talking about this concept of ecological overshoot, which contends that we cannot continue to consume resources more quickly than they can be replenished to Earth. So it's sort of really framed around this concept of population growth and waste and us sort of not being able to keep up with that demand or the Earth being able to sustain that.
And they're very keen to put population back in the debate.
Yes.
And to push back against the idea that it's illegitimate or problematic to have population concern as a part of this. But there are some good reasons why people are very sensitive about that.
Yeah, and I'm uncomfortable with the tone of some of what's in this paper around the topic of population and pronatalism. I'm sure we'll get to that. But in sort of, making that claim, they also tend to completely write off and discount the fact that transitioning our energy system can be done. They think that it's a waste of time to be even bothering with getting off of fossil fuels, which has enabled and fueled, the growth that we've had over the last couple of centuries. That we basically shouldn't bother with that. We just need to get on, with reducing the population very quickly and changing all of our habits and cutting consumption by 40 to 90%. What did you make of that as an opener?
So I thought that it was very hard to distinguish these people in terms of their beliefs about energy from the most foaming at the mouth fossil fuel advocate that you might find on Twitter. They fully agree with those sorts of people that not only did fossil fuels build our civilization as it exists today, but that no alternatives are in the offing that could provide the same quality of life or degree of consumption. And where they differ with those people in saying, and that's why we need to choose a worse quality of life and lower consumption. And don't worry, we can make that popular using the science of behavioural manipulation. But otherwise, like anything that your grumpy uncle might tell you after a couple of beers at a family function, these people believe. They believe there's not enough lithium in the world to supply all the batteries that would be needed to replace fossil fuels with clean energy. They believe that solar and wind are just going to make things worse. They're a very weird kind of enviro.
Oh, I'm going to try and be generous and assume
somebody should.
Yeah.
Like they don't. This is the issue. Is they throw these arguments out there and then they don't properly unpack them. I have to assume that what they mean is that we need to degrow society and we need to transition from fossil fuel as a source of energy generation to renewables, but just there's going to be less renewables because we've shrunk the economy and our needs are lower.
I think that's a very generous
but they
read
don't
of
actually
what's
say
been
that.
said there.
So that,
no, they
true.
don't.
So they don't say that. And a fair reading of this would be that we're not moving to renewables. We're getting rid of fossil fuels, presumably, right? Because they're no good either. And so
It's a little vague.
it is a bit vague.
Yeah, it actually doesn't.
It doesn't
acknowledge that you need to do the transition anyway, even if they don't think it's possible.
So I don't know whether we're A, just sticking with fossil fuels, B, like moving to renewables but moving to less renewables, C, getting rid of fossil fuels and renewables, and I don't know, moving 8 billion people to subsistence agrarian societies and hoping to feed them all. Like, it's not actually clear what they're trying to achieve, which is a little bit of a problem.
It's a minor flaw in the paper. It was actually a concept that I was really interested to explore with you both on this pod. I think we had looked at this paper thinking we haven't tackled the topic of degrowth is one word, but sufficiency is the other kind of concept that is gaining traction. It's sort of underserviced in a lot of public policy to date. But, that idea of finding the right balance when it comes to consumption and production. But I think the more popular or I would say serious thinking around that is thinking about strategies to reduce consumption and production levels through, yes, behavior change, but ingenuity in the way we build things. It's looking at facilitating, in transport, making less trips or using more public transport, reducing living space requirements in homes by intelligent design, engineering out material you don't need in construction processes, like betting on human ingenuity to tackle some of those challenges. And you
sound like a techno fix peddling false solutions fanatic, Frankie, because everything's a false solution to these people.
Well, they just don't engage in any of that complexity or, sort of deeper thinking around sufficiency. It's actually very shallow in its kind of consideration of the whole notion of sufficiency. It's just we need to use less or do less without really unpacking that in any extent.
We're spoilt for choice here because we can discuss some of the concepts and works that they invoke that appear to be a broader theme within contemporary degrowth discourse, or we can focus in on what look like unique weirdnesses of their particular argument around the supreme power lurking behind everything of behavioural manipulators in the marketing industry, informed by such luminaries as Edward Bernays, who used his Uncle Freud's psychological insights to unlock the techniques. Where do you want to go?
Well, I think it is useful to just unpack, the way the paper opens, because it's kind of like core argument sort of rests on this idea that it's human behaviour, maladaptive human behaviour, that is at the root of ecological overshoot. It's at the root of the climate crisis. Yeah. And it is kind of through human behaviour that we will come to a resolution of these issues. It draws a big fat line between economic growth and human behaviour, and then a big fat line from human behaviour to marketing. And it kind of centres marketing as the big bad.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a big bad, though, that's ready for a heel-face turn, a big bad ready to become the big good. You just grab that one ring and you start whacking away at all the ills of the world using its ultimate power to control people's souls.
And it kind of elides the whole sort of process of innovation and the creation of new technologies and science and all the various things that are the engine rooms of capitalism, but in a really weird way.
People want stuff because they've been told to want stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredibly patronising in the way it, I think, views the global population as just takers of marketing garb.
Including of marketing babies.
Yes.
Big Baby, the worst lobby group of all.
Yeah.
I think it's Boss Baby, Tennant.
Well, yeah, we should get to that. But as flawed as that framing might even actually is for kind of trying to unpack the central issue that they've put up, the thing that really irked me potentially even more was the way they talk about this, like the solutions in their mind. So this idea that, a royal we need to engage in mass behaviour change campaigns, manipulative behaviour.
Widespread behaviour manipulation, Frankie.
Yes. That, because all of a sudden that industry can be trusted to do these things. Who has the agency to do this was the big question, because they don't actually, to my recollection, foresee a real role for government.
Government is almost entirely absent from this paper.
Yeah.
So if you were of a mind to undertake said mass manipulation of behaviour, like, there are some pretty handy levers held by governments who can legislate things and put in place programs and do all sorts of stuff. And these guys don't engage with like that kind of thinking at all. And it's really unclear from reading it who they expect to get on with the doing of all of this, apart from that it's just the industry is all of a sudden going to about face and take this on as some cross to bear.
Well, there's a couple of employees of the marketing firm Ogilvy in the author list. They appear to be seeking to either walk the talk or work through their personal and professional crises through co-writing this paper. But the thing about this is the whole idea could easily come across as immensely sinister to anybody, like even just like ordinary people who might through some
totally. Like, kudos for coining the term widespread behaviour manipulation, because nobody's going to be freaked out by that.
Yeah. If anybody has seen what's happened with various reactions to the World Economic Forum's pandemic-era publication, The Great Reset, about cool stuff we should be doing to emerge from the pandemic, people out there in, online fever swamp land are terrified of this banal collection of bland ideas for public policy reform. Wait till they get a load of this. The only thing preventing this from probably not, from being a locus of paranoia is that the authors are complete clowns.
Oh, no, because you don't need to be concerned, Tennant, because the use of widespread behaviour manipulation will be governed by and anchored within a framework built upon the laws of the natural world, as well as the science limits to growth. So nothing to see here.
Yes.
So, I'm glad we had that chat.
and as you say, Frankie, say you were totally on board. This was a great idea. We wanted to put the entire marketing industry to work. For that to have any legitimacy, obviously it would need to have democratically elected governments at the table who would be voted into power on a behaviour manipulation platform by presumably the people in need of manipulation. Like, how does that even work?
Well, hence
I don't understand the theory of change.
Well, no, hence why I think we can agree with Tennant's assessment that I think that stops this from being viewed as actually sinister, because it's like it wouldn't actually happen the way that it's been outlined in this paper. It's not actually serious enough to get to that level of implementation.
See, this makes me fear that this is actually a false flag operation. This is the
distraction from the true Illuminati.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Which is already happening, winds of change style or something, seeping into all of our pop culture without us knowing about it. Yeah, so the other concept, we talked about growth and marketing as as the sort of contributors to this behavioural crisis. The other big one, big baby, we touched on was the idea of population. So they, as you say, they're very much wanting to put that back into the frame of the discussion. And they, again, I was really sort of disappointed with the lack of nuance or really engaging with the facts about global population growth as it is today in this paper. Their sort of premise and viewpoint is very much that women have been driven to wanting babies because governments have thrown money at them to do so, and marketing has thrown money at them, or not thrown money, but like suggested that they must have babies to feel complete and happy human beings, despite the fact that apparently women have a latent desire for no or few children. Like, it's very strange. And they obviously are contending that we need to be reducing population drastically, without going as far as suggesting like physical coercion, which is again scary and has some awful history attached to it. They're sort of framing their desired actions here more in that kind of behavior manipulation campaign, but they don't kind of unpack the fact that a lot of wealthier developed countries have seen population and the fertility rate drop right off. They do. I think maybe one of the smartest things in this paper is acknowledge, at least at a high level, that some of that is down to the empowerment of women in those countries by having women able to access family planning and be able to access childcare systems and be able to engage in the economy, as well as better survival rates and sort of healthcare systems, improving those outcomes. All of that over time has meant a lot of wealthier countries have seen those fertility rates drop off, and that is happening elsewhere in the world. So this population bomb that everyone was worried about a few decades ago isn't really eventuating.
That's right. And a lot of things have contributed to that demographic trend change. A lot of things associated with that are also drivers of economic growth have contributed to that. More educated women, more education available to and really needed by children. Children have become something you have to invest a lot in. You get individually and societally a huge return from that over time, but there's only so many big investments you can have on the go at a time. And what you sacrifice as a working parent is significant, given how much productivity has increased. The wages that you don't earn, or there are all kinds of challenges and downsides with managing this, but it's harder for people and less attractive for people to have as many children as once they did. And it's also less necessary because they live. You're not trying to account for a huge mortality rate. And all these things are terrific. People are terrific. Reducing the number of people is not an obvious good, to say the least.
But I think we should point out, this whole conversation we've just had about the reality of drivers in global population, the fact that, I think India is down now below replacement level, and China's fertility rate is low. Countries with the largest populations in the world are not seeing explosions in population. You're seeing, I think, higher growth in places like Africa. But again, that is projected to change over time, and demographers have been pretty accurate with with this modelling over time. So none of this is canvassed in this paper, really, to any extent.
They are careful to say we don't support the kind of things that were done at one point under Indira Gandhi in India around forced sterilisation. They don't support China's former one-child policy. They like education. They like status raising. They like telenovelas that model happy women who don't have children or very few.
Yeah.
That's good, but also they're still like writing articles with Paul Ehrlich, not this article, but others at the Mertz Institute's site of still going on with Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb back in 1968, which, evinced a lot of discomfort with population growth over there and at home, but over there especially.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me this section was kind of deeply confused. It opens with a big rant about, neoliberal feminism.
Oh, they hate them.
Oh, indeed, right? And, having brainwashed women into thinking that they can have it all. But as you said, Frankie, it's in advanced economies that have the lowest birth rates and the highest degree of autonomy. And then they go on to quote a UN report that states nearly half of all pregnancies are unintended. But I went and looked at that report because I thought that's a weird fact to throw out there without any context.
Yes.
And the whole point of the report is that unintended pregnancy is linked to lower levels of economic and social development.
Yeah.
So what is going to be the engine room for increasing the prosperity of the societies in which those women live, that is going to support them coming up into the middle class and having the ability to make better decisions around their own fertility. They're just eliding all of that because it's inconvenient for their argument.
Yeah. So I think maybe having pumped a bunch of shotgun shells into some of the uniquely coloured fish in this particular barrel, maybe we should take a crack with some dynamite at goldfish more frequently seen out in the discourse around the other elements of their degrowth ideas. Because it's possible that this is a uniquely bad paper in terms of its thinking on robed marketing masters hypnotising the world into doing what they say. But it is drawing, in other respects, on some fairly common critiques of the state of the world today and data sets about what's going on with resources and emissions and inequality and whatnot. Anybody want to take aim and fire on that? I
just want to point back to what I said earlier around the concept of sufficiency. I think it does need more attention, and there are smarter ways of doing things in the design of like so many of our systems that we rely on to live a good life, be that transport, housing, access to other services that really could use a focus on things like that. So that's, it's about designing for what we need. And like you are already seeing great examples of that elsewhere. I really don't like the way this paper bets against kind of human ingenuity and because we've risen to that task in other ways that, this paper doesn't recognise, like, even the context of that population bomb paper and this contention that hundreds of millions of people wouldn't be fed in the 70s. And we made enormous gains in agriculture and the way we grow crops effectively and things like that. So I would like to see, and I do think, policymakers do need to start turning their attention beyond, concepts like efficiency, which of course we're all familiar with, and we need to do more on, to some of these things around sufficiency, driving different choices for, things that are designed with less materials or materials that we continue to use more intensely. Actually, a lot of what isn't mentioned in this paper that really could be called on are a lot of the things we talk about in circular economy concepts. that aren't picked up here that, I think really speak to some of the ideas in sufficiency that we should be looking at. That's my shot.
It's a very conciliatory shot. Good on you, Frankie. Good on you.
To give him something.
Do you want to unleash the Kraken, Tennant?
All right. Well, I'm going to pick out two things because I think they are seen by a lot of people who will never read this particular paper. So one of them is a way of measuring the ecological footprint, and there's a widely seen statistic that humanity is currently consuming 1.8 Earth's worth of resources, or 1.5, or whatever the number that was spat out at the time that you saw that one article that said that. And this is a stat that a group who partners with WWF have produced a version of this, the Global Footprint Institute, and what it's actually measuring, as I understand it anyway, we may get some vigorous defences of these things in the comments, and by all means do so, or join our Patreon and tell us directly about how wrong we are.
You filthy capitalist.
I don't yet have a sense of sufficiency about the number of subscribers, as wonderful as those subscribers are. What this metric of footprint is in that version is measuring mostly is the amount of land area that the world would need to soak up our excess carbon dioxide emissions just through biological removal of CO2 into forests and vegetation and soils. And you can argue with, whether that's the most relevant way to think about that problem or not. But the thing is, it's a specific problem about climate change. But that stat is often interpreted, and it is by the authors of this paper, as saying, well, climate change isn't even the thing. If we solved climate change, quote unquote, through an energy transition, even though that would really be worse than doing nothing, well, we wouldn't have solved any of these other problems because, look, 1.8 Earths. But it's not 1.8 Earths of we're screwing up the net amount of forests in the world or the total of world fisheries or whatever else. It's largely a climate change problem, and if we solve that, we really would be doing something great. Yes, we need to solve other problems too, but it's huge. So I think this broad sense of powerlessness or inability to make successful change in anything like the current global order, like thought of as quite broadly, and not just even capitalism, but materialism, which, like, plenty of socialists and communists are very keen on materialism. They just have a different plan for how to deliver material well-being. I think the more that we can get away from that all embracing, the only way to make anything better is to rip everything up and go to some imagined simple, non-consuming pre-agrarian, even pre-agrarian life. I think let's dump that idea because it's not right. And I said there was one other, and that one other is numbers about how much of world emissions are attributable to rich people. And this is a number that I think was very influential. If listeners go back to our holiday special for 2023-24 and the people behind how to blow up a pipeline, they are very exercised by this kind of statistic that says, 30% of the world's emissions are produced by the richest 1% of individuals, or numbers like that. And what those numbers are doing, and these are dodgy ones that come out of Oxfam, unfortunately, who no doubt do a lot of terrific work, but seem to make some dodgy numbers as a side hustle. What those numbers come from is just taking total national emissions and dividing them up, ascribing them to individuals based on share of national income. But it's often taken as saying SUVs and mega yachts and private jets are producing 30% of the world's emissions or something like that. which is not true. And again, promotes a very weird set of priorities for responding to climate change. I don't think that shaming Taylor Swift for her Antonov mega plane that carries her impressive stage equipment from country to country is going to do a lot versus, deploying terawatts of clean energy.
Yeah, you're just trying to get in good with the Swifties there, Tennant.
I've witnessed their power. I desire their friendship.
You absolutely want to be on their good side.
So, I just want to acknowledge, where I'm positioned in this conversation. And I am broadly in the camp that says we need to rapidly retool capitalism to ensure it is put to work to address the climate crisis. And there are a lot of smart people, and some of them listen to this podcast.
None of them wrote this paper.
That reckon that is fantasy land, and that our current economic system is fundamentally at odds with an effective response to climate change, and we need to throw it out and start again. And that is an opinion. I can understand it. I can respect it. But my fundamental issue with it is I just can't see any practical way of achieving that outcome at a global level within any kind of meaningful time frame. Right? So you might think that makes me captured by the status quo or lacking imagination. But my question back would be, give me the theory of change, right? Give me the theory of change for building democratic support for a degrowth agenda in a time frame that is meaningful for addressing this problem that we all face. So that's where I'm positioned in this conversation, and that's obviously a perspective I brought to this paper. I think regardless of that, it's not a very good paper. Yeah. It's poorly argued. It elides really important issues. It doesn't really seek to properly grapple with the topics that it put on its own agenda. But having said all that, it is not an insane thing to say that we need to shift economic incentives to promote environmental outcomes. It's definitely not an insane thing to say that we need to shift behaviour as part of any successful response to climate change. And it's not an insane thing to say that there will need to be changes in patterns of consumption in developed countries, especially given the imperative to support economic development in the developing world. I just don't think this paper engages with any of those issues in a particularly sophisticated way. I'll admit, I've not done a lot of active reading on degrowth since university. My memories of that reading are pretty hazy. My intuition is that this must be a pretty bad example of this genre of paper. So if there are listeners out there that can point us to another better recent report that they reckon makes a more compelling case than this one does, send it in to us. mailbag@letmesumup.net. I would like to read the good version of this argument.
I think, Luke, you sound like some kind of ultra-centrist.
No one would ever call me that.
You'll be first up against the wall when the marketing Illuminati take over.
All right, it is almost time for one more thing. But before we do that, we launched our Patreon last episode. Frankie, how's it going over there?
We did, and we have received a lot of love from you guys. I just want to say a massive thank you to those of our summer uppers who leveled up and became super summer uppers and signed up to support us on Patreon. We so appreciate the early support. We sort of feel a bit weird talking about needing to ask for financial support. And I feel like we were pretty honest about why we were doing it. And it's just lovely to see that's resonated with some of you. So, I think we just want to say thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And, we've got some great early engagement on the Patreon too.
Yeah. And, Tennant, marketing is all about FOMO. So what are the folk that are fully intending to sign up but haven't signed up yet missing out on over on the Patreon?
They are missing out on scorching hot boko, bonus content your eyes will not believe. Ross Garneau memes, ill-considered rewordings of classic 70s funk anthems to be about superpower, the alternate titles that we nearly gave to the most recent episode of the pod, and the full unexpurgated notes, including all the things that were great points that sadly we didn't have time for in the regular episode.
That is true. I was just a bit sad that the Ross Garneau meme that you produced wasn't literally the deal with it meme. Like, you had the pixel sunglasses, but you didn't go that next step. Because I reckon that could work with Ross.
Well, who knows what may happen next week in Boko Land.
That's true.
Anyway, yes, the Boko knows no bounds. You know what I thought, actually? We don't have T-shirts. The T-shirts are coming. But what we do have is...
Keep the dream alive.
T-shirt designs, which could be shared with our Patreon.
Oh, we do. Oh, that's a good idea. Oh, dear.
So, yes.
Sorry, Super Summer Uppers. You're about to see a plethora of T-shirt designs that almost saw the light of day late last year.
Yeah, there's some good ones in there. So
there are.
Thank you for the support. And if you want to access all that boko and, more importantly, experience the warm glow of knowing you are supporting your favourite climate and energy podcast, you know where to go. Patreon.com/ let me sum up. All right, it is now time for one more thing in which we all share something that is currently captivating our attention. Tennant, what have you got?
I have an apology to make for the fact that we are not talking this week about a different paper, Food Without Agriculture.
Some of the boko that our Patreons are enjoying are false flag operations in which we trick them into reading papers that we then read and decide they're even crapper than this one, apparently.
This paper might be completely right. It's just that it was a bit scanty. I do recommend, we'll put it in the notes, have a look at this because it's a very provocative paper and it's only 4 or 5 pages. What it's arguing is that synthesizing food, not just making like plant-based meat or cell-based meat substitutes or whatnot, but chemically synthesizing food analogues or food components from non-agricultural inputs could be a great deal cleaner and better for the environment in many metrics, land intensity, water intensity, emissions intensity, than a lot of the food that we eat currently. And they provocatively illustrate this with calculations that suggest that replacing palm oil from Indonesia or the United States with synthetic oil made from natural gas and the current US electricity grid, electricity input, would be lower emissions.
What?
They also say, and you could have 0 emissions if you make it with air-captured feedstock and with fully clean electricity. Now, a lot of people will go, I can eat natural gas and that's cleaner than eating something that grew on a farm somewhere. That doesn't sound right. Well, go read the paper and critique it, but also realise that it's very much a stub of a paper that might provoke some more research that ultimately we can really dig into in an episode.
I'll be even more assertive. I think this is a brain fart. I'm a little bit sad we read this paper, but I'm glad we didn't read that one.
That said, we have wanted to do a paper on food and agriculture and I guess alternatives around that. So if anyone out there listening knows of a good one on that, send it our way.
No, I am Be curious about arguments that like plants are inefficient and should be abolished in favour of like solar. Plants only use 0.5 percentage point of the solar energy that they receive. Solar panels use like 23% or more. So, you know, there's some very controversial arguments that can be made there. I'm excited about them, but this was not the paper.
All right, Frankie, what have you got?
I'm going to go with a bit of current affairs. I think hot off the press. I think it's an interesting development to see the federal coalition have just announced a little reshuffle to their shadow ministry, including appointing Melissa McIntosh into a new role of a shadow minister for energy affordability. That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously you've definitely seen a focus from the opposition on just cost of living and the need to tackle that. It will be super interesting to see what, you know, policy priorities might evolve out of that, you know, a new ministry. So, like, I'm choosing to be optimistic about that. It's good to acknowledge that it's an issue, and hopefully would see a focus on, you know, things like the need to focus on efficiency, you know, as a way of tackling energy bills and things like that. So it would be great to see the coalition, the federal opposition, tackle some of that. And also, interestingly, in and around the announcement of the shadow ministry, I think I got the other interesting thing about Melissa McIntosh there as well is that she's also the shadow minister for Western Sydney, and I just checked her electorate is right next door to Chris Bowen, who's the federal climate minister. So that ought to make, I think, for some interesting perhaps discussion between the two of them. But also though, just acknowledging that Western Sydney is it's also a really unique area in terms of climate challenges, struggles with urban heat. It's a very interesting area in terms of the challenges people are looking at from a climate perspective. So that all makes for a very interesting policy debate over the next little while. And then I'm just going to throw a little teaser out there because whilst we were hungrily awaiting some detail on the coalition's broader energy policy, which is very much focused on all things nuclear, where we've not seen the detail of that yet, but I do think we've committed to tackling that in a BOCO format for the Patreon when that eventuates. So stay tuned on that one.
Get in on that one, listeners. If you wish to hear the spiciest of takes, there's only one place you can.
Yes. All right. Well, I just want to pull one out for Catherine Murphy, who recently resigned her gig as chief political correspondent at The Guardian to take up a job in the Prime Minister's office. And I want to wish Paul Cupp the very best. I'm sure he's going to do a fabulous job. Big shoes to fill. But I do have to admit I'm already missing her Saturday columns. I'm definitely missing her presence on the Guardian Australia Politics podcast, where she had the remarkable knack of getting politicians to say things that were both candid and thoughtful. It was like they forgot they were being recorded for the duration of the podcast. It was really remarkable. But for the purposes of this podcast, we must particularly lament the absence of her commentary on climate politics, which it was bracing and it was also well informed. Yep. And I'd struggle to name a journalist who was her equal when it came to being across the detail of this specific topic. Mm. So, yeah, it's a bit sad for us. She's got a new gig. Godspeed, Catherine. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope we see you in some form or other on the other side.
Hear, hear. And we should shout out for those listeners who maybe haven't listened to our entire back catalogue. Shame on you. But But secondly, we should acknowledge that Catherine joined us for one of our earlier pods. I think it was episode 7.
Was
The Last Fire in the Forest. She came on to talk about, this feels like a long time ago, but this was late 2022, and the newly elected government was out there talking about the safeguard mechanism reforms, and she came on to share some of her PTSD and history around, the various reforms of governments past,
yes,
present, and potentially future.
It was group therapy, Frankie.
It really was, wasn't it?
It was lovely, and I think while it was on a very topical focus, I think it did do a pretty good job of kind of unpacking some of the history, as you say. So, well worth a listen. All right. That's a show, I reckon. If you have the inclination to heed our shout out for sending us the best of thinking on the degrowth agenda, or on transitioning to synthetic foodstuffs, or whatever else may take your fancy, you can send all those ideas into the mailbag at letmesumup.net. We also have a website, Frankie. What's there?
Well, our entire glorious back catalogue. Catherine Murphy is but one of the gems that can be mined and discovered there. So if you head on over to letmesumup.net, you can listen to every one of the episodes that we've ever done for your listening pleasure.
And Tennant, one last time for this episode, we have a Patreon. Why is that good?
Why is that good? Because it helps to make the continuation of this podcast and all the good discussions that it facilitates possible. It's going to keep one Luke Menzel sane and able to play his crucial role in making all this happen. And it's also going to be a lot of fun for the people who are super summer uppers and getting all that fabulous boko at patreon.com/letmesumup.
I reckon it's / right?
God damn it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm spouting online misinformation.
That's not the kind of behavioural manipulation we need, Tennant.
My memory failed.
All right. Patreon.com /letmesumup. But while you dial that important Earl into your phones, for Frankie Muscovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
There was a thing I was trying to find in time for the Catherine Murphy retrospective, and I couldn't find it in time, but I have found it now. And I don't think it should go into the episode, but I will just share it with you two. It's from the Analects of Confucius, and Confucius says, "Truly straightforward was the historiographer Yu. When good government prevailed in his state, he was like an arrow. When bad government prevailed, he was like an arrow. A superior man indeed is Chu Po Yu. When good government prevails in his state, he is to be found in office. When bad government prevails, he can roll his principles up and keep them in his breast."
Oh, that's lovely.
People who are doing something outside of government, and then they see an opportunity to do something important and go and do that, I think that is great.
Yeah.
That can be a nice little bit of boko just for Catherine.
Once she bloody backs us.
That's right.
We'll make right. Haven't seen her on the Patreon yet.
We'll make a Catherine Murphy tier.
Got to share all that PMO lucre with us, Catherine.